I didn't believe in ghosts until I met my husband. I think that the greatest and most terrible fear one can experience is the fear of being trapped. It is paralyzing and unending. I write this as a warning, in hopes that no one else will have to meet the same fate as I have. There is a demon that follows my husband and I'm afraid it will never leave. I did not have a religious upbringing, the product of forward-thinking parents. Our belief system was based in science, not faith. So it only made sense that I never gave a second thought to the idea of believing in ghosts. Stories of haunted houses, eyewitness encounters, and documentaries on the paranormal were nothing but made-up stories to me, cheap entertainment for the gullible masses. It was not until I turned 29, the year I married the man of my dreams, that my views would change. Jonathan and I met through a mutual friend, and it didn't take long for me to see that he was perfect in nearly every way. Or, perfect for me at least. We dated for 2 happy years, and I did not hesitate when he asked for my hand in marriage. He, like I, did not care for blind faith. Despite our lack of a religion to dictate our decisions, our views on marriage were quite traditional and we did not move in together until our wedding night. He worked for his father's company and made a decent living. Our house was purchased and ready to be lived in as soon as our vows were made. It was an old colonial, built in the early 1900s, a large home with 4 bedrooms, original hardwood flooring, a remodeled kitchen, and a lovely bay window which you could look out to see the 5 acres of land that was our backyard. I fell in love with it the moment I saw it. We worked to make everything about it perfect, hired interior designers and professional decorators, purchased the highest quality furniture we could afford. It was, by all accounts, a dream home. Our dream home. In those early days, I never could have fathomed the utter nightmare that house would become. At first, it started off small. An object falling off a table or shelf despite no one being around, a door creaking open when there was no draft. We both wrote such things off as coincidence, random happenstance, nothing that couldn't be logically explained away, nothing to even think of. Then, the scratching began. After a month or so of living together, I awoke one night to the sound of scratching which seemed to be coming from our bedroom closet. In the dim light of the moon shining through our window, I could see that the door was closed and unmoving. My first thought was that it must be mice. It was an old house in the country, after all. I should call an exterminator in the morning. But, the sound was not the light pitter-patter of rodent claws. It was slow and rhythmic, like nails repeatedly dragging along a wall. My stomach began to knot up with anxiety. I inhaled deeply and shook my head back and forth to be sure that I was not simply dreaming, that my faculties were not fogged by the grasp of slumber. But, I was awake and alert, and the sound did not cease. I could feel my heart rate increase. Despite my body's reaction of unease, I firmly told myself that it must not be anything, and forced myself back to sleep, which was not overly difficult given my exhaustion from having done so much housework the previous day. Looking back, this should have been my first warning, but I was stubborn in my ways, believing that worrying about such things was childish and naive. I heard a weird scratching noise last night, I told Jonathan as we ate breakfast the next morning. It sounded like it was coming from the closet. He shrugged. Do you think we have mice? It could have been from the attic, sometimes sounds are hard to pinpoint correctly. I smiled, our minds were wired to think in the same fashion. I had thought the same thing, but it didn't sound like the footsteps of animals. It sounded more human. He nodded his head in acknowledgement as he shoved another bite of scrambled eggs into his mouth. A long, slow scratching? I nodded. How did he know that? I've heard sounds like that since I was a kid. It's probably nothing. Wait, what? Was all I could manage to say. Strange things like that have always happened to me. Things falling off tables and such. But, most often, the scratching sound. I've heard it at every place I've lived, even when I was young and living with my parents. Nothing has ever come of it other than simply being a slight annoyance. So, I wouldn't worry about it. I thought I knew everything about Jonathan. For the first time, I felt as if I had just found out something that had been kept from me. Why have you never told me this before? Again, he shrugged. I never felt the need to tell you about something stupid like that. Like I said, nothing's ever come of it, so I don't bother worrying about it. His demeanor was so matter-of-fact, so unbothered. This partly brought me comfort, a reassurance that I was simply overreacting. Yet, something deep within me caused a physical response of upset and unease. In the end, I resolved to push it aside and try to forget the occurrence entirely. It would not be until 2 weeks later that the demise of my sense of safety would begin. It was a night like any other. Jonathan had just returned home from work, and I was upstairs putting away laundry. I was headed towards our bedroom, holding my clean dresses and his clean suits in my arms. Upon passing through the doorway, I smelled something unlike anything I had ever smelled in my life. I immediately gagged before even taking a step further into the room. It was a bitter stench of decay and rot, a nausea-inducing scent that hit the back of your throat the moment you breathed it in. My primal instincts came to the surface and spoke to me before I even had time to form a thought. It was the smell of death. I held my hand to my nose to no avail. The further into the room I walked, the stronger it grew. It seemed to be emanating from the open closet door. "Jonathan!" I yelled between gags. "Get up here now!" "What is it?" He appeared in the doorway, out of breath from running up the stairs to reach me. I didn't need to say a word, for the moment he inhaled, he lurched forward, covering his nose with his hand as well. "Something died in here!" I exclaimed without hesitation. Jonathan remained near the doorway, but reached his hand out for me to take. I dropped the clothes onto the floor and grabbed his hand as he pulled me into the hallway and shut the door behind him. "That's bad," he gasped, finally able to take a deep breath. "There has to be an animal that got into the house and fucking died." Immediately, I went to the closet down the hall and pulled out our small ladder and a flashlight. "Go check the attic," I told Josh, carrying the ladder towards him and placing it beneath the attic access panel just outside our bedroom door. I held the flashlight out to him. He let out a sigh and began to climb up. I paced back and forth, waiting impatiently as he disappeared into the attic. It didn't take him long to come back down. "There's nothing up there." "Are you sure?" "Yes," I shined the flashlight across the whole ground. "And, it doesn't even smell bad up there. It can't be coming from up there. I'm calling an exterminator." He paused for a moment, his eyes drifting down towards the floor. "Give it a few hours. It might go away." In utter confusion, I grasped for the right words. "What the fuck are you talking about? Clearly there is something dead in there. I've smelled this in other places I've lived. It's come and gone away before." His gaze still could not meet mine. "What do you mean you've smelled this before? I've never been around death, but, Jesus Christ, what else could that possibly be?" "I don't know. It happened quite often at the apartment I lived at before moving here. It always went away though." Once again, I felt as though I was learning something about my husband that he had not intended for me to know. None of this made sense, and his vague secrecy made me all the more concerned. Not knowing what else to say, I stormed downstairs and took my phone from the coffee table, quickly dialing the number of the first exterminator I could find online. "Hello, yes, I need to get someone out here as soon as possible. I don't know what kind of infestation it is. It just smells like something died in our wall. I don't know." A few minutes later I had an appointment set. The extermination company would have a man sent out first thing in the morning. I slept on the couch that night. I wanted nothing to do with being upstairs. As much as I tried to convince myself that an exterminator would solve our problems, the whole situation had me feeling unsettled. The objects and doors moving seemingly on their own, the scratching, and now this. It had only been a few months in our new home and I was beginning to feel something looming over this place, looming over me. Something heavy, something dark. "There's nothing here." The exterminator slowly made his way down the stairs and set his bag of equipment on the foyer floor. I leaned against the wall at the base of the steps. I hadn't been back upstairs since yesterday. There has to be something. I've been hearing scratching at night, and that smell has to be a dead animal. He wiped the sweat from his forehead and furrowed his brows, clearly annoyed with me. "Ma'am, I've searched this house from top to bottom. No mice, no rats, no animal droppings, no nests, no signs of anything whatsoever. And, frankly, there is no smell up there." Jonathan's words echoed in my head. "Give it a few hours. It might go away." Now was my turn to be annoyed. "Then how do you explain what I've already told you?" "I don't know, but I've done my job." He picked his bag up and headed towards the front door. "You'll receive a bill in the mail within the next few days," he said before stepping out and shutting the door behind him. I stormed through the living room and into the kitchen, grabbing a bottle of wine off the counter and taking a big gulp straight from it. Jonathan wouldn't be home for several more hours and I didn't want to be left alone with my thoughts at the moment. I brought the bottle with me to the couch and spent the rest of my day watching ridiculous sitcoms on television. The slam of the front door startled me. I looked over to see Jonathan taking off his shoes and putting his briefcase on the floor. I grabbed my cell phone off the end table to check the time. "It's 6 o'clock already?" Jonathan came into the living room, his eyes shifting from me down to the empty wine bottle at my feet. "You've had an interesting day, I see." "The Exterminator was an asshole this morning," I replied. "He told me he didn't find anything and then got pissed off when I questioned him." Jonathan let out a sigh. "Celine, you're letting your anxiety get the best of you. If the Exterminator said there's nothing, then he's probably right. So just try to forget about it, okay?" My head felt light and floaty from the alcohol. And, I had to admit, my nerves were gone. I had been at home alone all day and nothing happened. Why had I even been stressing out so much? Over what? A smell? To my hazy brain, the idea of being worried about something so trivial seemed silly. Still, I was angry with my husband for keeping the fact that strange things happened to him from me. Things got worse that night. My eyes sprung open and I jolted up, gasping for breath. It took a moment to look around and realize that I was in our bedroom, Jonathan sleeping peacefully next to me. My brain registered that I had simply had a nightmare. Yet, despite having just woken up moments before, I couldn't remember what the nightmare was about no matter how hard I tried. As I tried to steady my breath, my stomach began to churn. It was back, that rancid smell of decay. It hung heavy in the air, warm and thick, and I immediately started gagging. I pinched my nose between my fingers, flicked on the bright lamp that sat on the end table, and got out of bed. This time, I was going to figure out what the hell was going on. The further I walked towards the closet door, the more vile it became. Hesitantly, I turned the doorknob and swung the door open, allowing the light of the room to pour inside. There was nothing there. I went to Jonathan and angrily shook him by the shoulder to wake him up. "What?" he yelled, still half asleep. "The fucking smell is back and it's coming from the closet," I said, nose still pinched shut. He opened his eyes and grimaced at the stench in the light of the lamp. He could easily see the open and empty closet. However, he kept his eyes focused on it, as if in deep thought. Without a word, Jonathan got out of bed, walked to the closet, and began examining its inner walls. "What are you doing?" I asked nervously. He ran his fingers down the wall. "Look at this." I stepped inside and saw what he was so interested by. The dull gray-blue paint of the side wall was chipped off, showing the white plaster underneath. It was in the pattern of 4 long, vertical lines. Scratches. They were far too deep to have been from mice or rats. And, they were at eye level. The only source I could think of was human. My chest began to tighten and I could feel the onset of a panic attack. But, I didn't want to succumb to my anxiety, didn't want to feel that vulnerable. "You've heard scratching before, and it always just goes away, huh?" I said sarcastically as I pointed to the marks dug into the paint. My nervousness had turned to anger. Jonathan seemed dumbfounded. He opened his mouth as if he was about to speak, but no words came out. I was going to throw up if I stayed in that cloud of death any longer. I had to get out of there. I stepped out into the hallway and immediately cried out in pain. A sharp stabbing pain shot up the bottom of my heel. I raised my foot to examine it. A large shard of glass was sticking halfway out of my skin, a thick stream of red seeping down from the gash. I felt along the wall for the hallway light switch. The fluorescent bulbs switched on and the floor lit up in reflection. The entire hallway was covered in shards of broken glass. Every picture I had hung was shattered. Every vase, statue, and knick-knack I had set on shelves and tables was on the ground in 1,000 pieces. My antique mirror looked as though it had been punched, the intricate gold frame still on its nail, but all of its glass had cracked and fallen out. The only thing that was still perfectly intact was the window at the end of the hall. I screamed. The confusion, the anxiety, the pain, the downright fear of my own home had hit too hard at this point. Jonathan ran to the doorway, catching himself and abruptly stopping before coming into contact with the glass. He stared at the floor for a moment, then at the walls, and then his eyes gazed down the center of the hall, growing wider as they focused on seemingly nothing. It was as if he was seeing something that I could not. He took a deep breath. This was the first time I had seen him worried about the situation. "We're going to go stay somewhere else for tonight,"